we'll get started. We're going to pick up a new topic, and actually, I thought today we would continue the topic of prayer, maybe in a little bit of a different vein, or maybe in somewhat of the same vein, since that was what was suggested by the Ephesians 6 reading. And I thought we would look at Romans 8. I referenced it in the meditation, but I thought, well, let's look at it a little more, perhaps, carefully. So look at Romans 8. And the verse I really want us to start with is verse 26. So Romans 8:26, in the same way the Spirit also helps our weakness. For we do not know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. So here's Paul again talking about prayer, and he's talking about the very Spirit of God within us and how the Spirit is praying for us, interceding for us from within us. So as we're looking at these couple of verses, I don't know, does it raise questions? It's 8:26, and I read 27 as well. Romans 8:26 and 27.
If it was Lectio, I'd be automatically saying weakness. I wonder, that's very broad. That's all I'm gonna say. And it just makes me think a little deeper about it, but I don't know that I've ever noticed that word out of reading that. I just did.
Yeah, because it's like you're saying, that's true even outside the context of talking about prayer. The Spirit helps us in our weakness. All weakness, right? Weakness of will, weakness of, when we lack strength, weakness of knowledge when we don't know what to do. I mean, contextually, weakness of prayer, but it's a broader, I think we could read that and say, let me contemplate all the ways in which I'm weak and all the ways in which the Spirit is interceding, right, is making up the difference.
Is weakness the same as sin?
I would say sin is one way in which I'm weak, right? But sin has its origin too. So we get so wrapped up in the sin itself. Sin comes from somewhere, right? Usually it comes from ignorance. We don't know any better. We're short-sighted. We think, well, this will be good. It's not good. It's basically because we don't know God and the ways of God that we foolishly choose things that seem to be wise to us, but they're not. And they end up being an expression of some imperfect way of living, right? Some sinfulness, some falling short.
But aren't there some that even say that all sin comes from ignorance, right?
I would say, in some ways, if we knew God, if I really knew God, I wouldn't have a desire to sin. Because the problem is sin looks appealing because I don't know there's something far better.
So the weakness is a spiritual one.
Yeah, which plays itself out in all sorts of very physical, temporal sort of ways. But the weakness is, far more like central to the problem. It's a weakness of ignorance. It's a weakness of not knowing God, of being estranged from God. Yeah, because I think the thing is, if we really saw God, none of us would say, "Well, I don't think I want him." We would all be like, "Yes, I want God," because we would be confronted with absolute, unending, perfect love and acceptance and hospitality and welcoming. Who's going to say, "Nah, I think I don't want all that goodness"? So our problem is we don't see God that readily. And so we choose other things to, try and fill the void, find acceptance, find satisfaction, but we don't know that God is, in God's self, the complete satisfaction of all of our possible and exceeds all of our possible desires. So if we saw God, if we had knowledge of God, and I don't mean in our brains, I mean, the relational knowledge of really aware of God, related to God, we wouldn't sin.
It seems like this knowledge thing really is the type of weakness that Paul's emphasizing here, isn't it? He talks about we don't know what we ought to pray for. He who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, and we know that in all things. So that's a flavor of weakness that he's hammering on here.
Yeah, we just don't know what to do. That's our weakness. We're not competent to guide ourselves, and so the reassurance is, but the Spirit of God is in you, taking up all the slack, where you don't know the Spirit of God is sufficient.
And none of us are confident.
Right. Because in one sense, if we use Paul's definition of sin is falling short of the glory of God. Then every single thing I do, the meditation I delivered just now was sinful because it did not meet the glory of God, right? Whatever that would be, if I had said words that had matched the very glory of God, it would have been different, right? In this sense, so we have to get away from like the idea of a dualistic thing, like there's good actions and there's sinful actions. If we realize Paul's definition of sin is anything that fails to achieve the ultimate expression of God, well, then everything's sin. My prayers are sinful. My good deeds are sinful because they're just not perfect. But I'm not mortified over that, right? Why would I be mortified? God is loving, forgiving, I'm not paralyzed out of the fear that even my prayers fall short of the glory of God. It's like, that's okay. We have the Spirit who intercedes, right? Does that make sense? So even the good things I do still fall short. And so that creates, I think, a profound humility and a reticence to judge anyone else. Well, they sin. Well, everything I do is sin, right? Because everything I do is falling short of what it could be if it were absolutely, an expression of the fullness of God. So then I realize, I'm in constant need of God, and I'm assured that God will supply all my falling short, and so I'm not worried about it. I'm not stressed about it. I'm accepting, yes, I'm imperfect in every single thing I do, and that's okay. Does that making sense?
I'm not sure this can be answered,
What?
but I keep being struck by interceding with groanings to the Lord. The nature of this groaning, if that's even possible.
Good point. It may not be possible, but it's ubiquitous. Go back to verse 22. For we know that the whole creation groans. There's a lot of groaning going on in Romans 8. The whole creation groans. And I think humanity's part of creation, but I think he's talking about everything but us. Like the moon, the stars, the rivers, the atmosphere, everything is groaning, right? But then verse 23, and not only this, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves. And then the Spirit's groan, right? So Why do we groan within ourselves?
Sometimes it feels like that groaning is deeper understanding or deeper of a level of maturity maybe.
Yes. Because what is verse 23? Why do we groan? Because you're hitting it. What is verse 23? Why do we groan in verse 23? Yeah. Keep looking at verse 23. Everyone's saying the right things. I want you to see how all of your right statements are flowing from what he's actually saying in verse 23. Why are we groaning?
Eagerly awaiting the redemption of our body.
Right. And before he says we're groaning, it's having the first fruits of the Spirit, even ourselves groan within ourselves.
I guess knowing that we fall short.
Yes. If we didn't have the first fruits of the Spirit, I don't know that I'd be groaning, right? Because I wouldn't know what I don't know. It seems like what he's saying is all creation is groaning, and those of us who have the first fruits of the Spirit have started, like you're saying, from a deeper maturity, like Bob's saying, a sense that things are not right. How did we come to understand that except the Spirit within us in its fruit, the first fruit, the first how this is coming out to play in humanity? We then kind of have a holy sorrow, like, oh, things are not like they should be.
It's kind of like the measure of people's maturity is evidenced by their increasing humility or realizing how you fall short of whatever.
Right. Yeah. So there's a kind of, Jesus is described as the man of sorrows. I mean, this is not like he couldn't be happy, right? We're not saying that. We're not saying there's an absence of joy. We're saying, in a way that's not exclusive, like you can only have one or the other. We can be people of great joy, knowing the end to which all things are moving, and yet be moved by a sense of sorrow because we can see how things will be, then we see more distinctly how they are not in the moment. So we can both have like this unquenchable joy because it is inevitably headed there. So I like Richard Rohr. He says, if a person is not joyful, then they're not a mystic. You know, he likes to talk about being a Christian mystic. He says, if they're not joyful, they're not a mystic. I don't know what they are, but you know, they may talk about a lot of spiritual, but they're not a mystic unless they're like happy, an irrepressible sense of joy that you see in them. Not because they think the present is all it can be, but because they know where everything's headed and they're excited about that.
Does the arrow go the other direction?
What does that mean? What do you mean? What?
Well, he said if you're not joyful, you're not a mystic. Does the arrow go the other way as well?
What do you mean by the arrow goes the other way?
Well,
What would, you mean the inverse?
Arrow, you know.
Like if you're joyful, then you're a mystic?
Yeah.
No, I don't know that would be true. Because you could be steeped in ignorance and be very joyful. You know, I know nothing, and boy, life is grand. You know, I mean, so I don't think it's like, well, if you're joyful, therefore you are a mystic. But his point is, if you're not joyful, you aren't a mystic. Like you don't have the vision that God is alive in the world and that all things are finding their unity in him and that, you know, salvation is assured. I mean, there's so much to be joyful about, right? So if you're truly in tune with that mystery of how God is present, then you will have joy. But that doesn't mean you won't be also a person who is very much in touch with the imperfect and aware of it. So you're not like shallow in your joyfulness. You know, oh, everything's perfect. No, everything is not perfect. I deeply see the imperfection because the first fruit of the Spirit. So I think what he's saying is, verse 22, all creation groans because all creation has never been out of step with God. And see what he says, and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. So creation is waiting for the child to be born, right? Knowing there's the culmination of all things coming. Now, since we have the first fruit of the Spirit, we too have joined in the groaning of the universe. Like, because now we're anticipating, as he says, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. So because now we see what's coming, there's a groaning about the present, right? But it doesn't remove that irrepressible joy about the future, the promises, where everything's headed. And then I think, so when he gets down to the spirit groaning, that's what saying that kind of groaning is part of the nature of God. And when we have been united with God in that kind of way, we groan about the things that God groans about. Right? We see the imperfections. And we long for the day of our own redemption, of things being set right, of justice being done. Right? And so does God. He's longing for that day. And that's where the prayer enters in. That's where the Spirit prays within us with that kind of perspective, with the groanings of what can't even be put totally into words, I think is, the sense of it. And other thoughts?
This verse seems very comforting to me. It uncouples my faithfulness, righteousness, knowledge, understanding, strength, wisdom from God's goodness and power and willingness to be good in my situation. And this is one of the things I tend to lean into when I pray with people who are sick or scared. It's things. I think it's just a powerful reminder of, maybe a concrete scriptural evidence for that uncoupling that people, myself included, need when we're in crisis, especially.
Yeah. I like the way you said that. They're not attached in such a way. Yeah, I can uncouple those two. Yeah. To me, the groaning here is the suffering God motif, which.
That also, I think, is comforting.
Yeah, I think that's the only answer to our struggles is the vision of the cross, is a God unafraid to suffer with us.
Someone who gets it.
Right, someone who gets it, right? So when I'm frustrated about the injustice of the world, I know that God is even more frustrated with the injustices of the world, right? It's not like, well, he's up there going, don't worry, I've got everything under control. It's all going according to plan. Look, it's not all going according to plan. I know it, and you know it, right? That vision of God, like, he's very serene because everything's going like it should. The Holocaust, part of his plan. No, you should rage at the Holocaust, right? And God rages at the Holocaust. I know it changes our idea of God if you think God is, minutely controlling each and every event. But then you have to have God who is the God of child abuse and genocide and everything else, which is a horrific God. I'd rather be an atheist than worship a God who approves of such thing and designs them as such. I would have to park my whole sense of moral rectitude. I would just have to put it all aside to embrace a God who thinks this is good or who declares it to be good, right? But that's not the God we have. We have the God of the cross. We have the God of groaning of the Spirit. This is the suffering God. And for me, it's the only way to live through my own suffering is not to say, well, what's the grand plan here, but to know God is with me in the pain I'm feeling, and he is not insensitive to it. In fact, I would say, amazingly enough, God has taken upon himself the pain of the whole world and continues to do so willingly. That's better than me, because I don't want to willingly take on anyone's pain, right? You know, I kind of like to push it away, but God willingly takes it on, right? So that while not giving me answers, gives me companionship in the most bleak times where there are no answers. And I got nothing to say, and neither God's not saying anything, so I don't know what to do, right? Except know he's with me, and he's in pain. He's the God of the cross in that moment, suffering with me everything I am and more. So I'm not abandoned, right? Which is, I know I'm going everywhere, but that's Psalm 22 that Jesus quotes from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? The Psalm says he's not forsaken, right? So it's not that when we're suffering, God does forsake us. He quotes the Psalm because the Psalm is the reassurance that when the psalmist says, I feel forsaken, when you get down to, I think it's verse 19, it says, but you will not abandon your Holy One. You know, the Psalm says, you haven't abandoned me. That's what Jesus is remembering, is no matter how dark it seems, you are still with me. And he recalls and quotes the opening line to the Psalm that affirms that. So he's not abandoned on the cross. So I'm in that situation, and I can quote the first verse and say, it seems like you have abandoned me. And the Psalm reminds me, but that will never happen. Even if I don't perceive it, right? I don't perceive your presence, I'm assured of your presence. That's the way to navigate, I think, the dark night of the soul, to put it in the terms of St. John of the Cross. Right, what were you going to?
So the groaning of God and those things that we share with God that way are meant to be shared. But our whining, or when the scriptures talk about the gnashing of teeth, that definitely just refers to our human feelings.
I like that way of putting it. Yeah, the grumbling of Israel in the wilderness is not exactly motivated by the first fruit of the Spirit, right? So yeah, there are those things that we do: grumble, whine, yeah, get angry. That's the gnashing of teeth. And, so angry, gritting my teeth about. Yeah.
So how do you know whether you're groaning or gnashing?
You feel good about it.
Well, and that's a good question. That's, you know,
Sincere question.
no, I'm saying it's a good question. And my first reaction is, I don't always know. I don't always know. But again, like I said earlier, we are welcome to lift up everything and anything to God. You cannot communicate to God anything that's amiss. Now, it may be in terms of it's totally not what God's will is or something, but you will never be slapped down by God for having expressed yourself. Read the Old Testament prophets, like Jeremiah, when they basically say, God, why did you give me this job anyway? I hate it. The people are, they're raging against God. Does he slap them down for it? When Job says all that he has to say about God, God, you're unjust. God, if you showed up, I could win my case in a court of law because you've done me wrong. Because God shows up at the end and says, I like you, Job. You're better than your friends. He's been the one who's been accusing God of being unjust. So, I don't always know, am I whining, am I groaning? But either way, I think if I pour that out to God, if I'm honest and transparent, I confess it all, here's God, what I'm feeling, I don't even know if it's right.
Well, he knows it's there anyway.
Yeah.
Even if you don't say it.
Yeah, I'm not telling him anything he's
You're not
not.
doing yourself any favors by holding back.
Yeah, there's something therapeutic about pouring it out, right? There's something about yelling at God that's okay. It can actually be helpful, right? You can't say, well, I can't do that. The scriptures are full of that, especially the Psalms, right? 1/3 of the Psalms are Psalms of anger. We call them imprecatory Psalms because they're calling down curses. And they're asking questions. God, why have you fallen asleep? God, where are you? God, why aren't you? I mean, these are holy scripture of people accusing God of being negligent, accusing God of being absent, and they're put in scripture for us to pray. So they're saying, this is okay. Because I think when we do that, often that process of, we're still in relationship with God. It's still God I'm yelling at, right? I'm in relationship with God. I'm frustrated with God. Marcia, what are you?
Well, I just think of groaning more as sadness.
Yeah.
And the gnashing of teeth more as anger.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, I think here it's that sorrow. It's that sense of, oh, it's just not what it should be. The gnashing of teeth, yeah, is when I'm angry. And to Alan's good point is, sometimes I don't know, am I just sorrowful or am I just more angry? And what's the...
Depends on how many F-bombs you're dropping.
And there's not probably a bright line between the two, right? It's messy. But that's where I'm encouraging us to say, well, pour it out to God. And he's not going to be upset about any of it. And there's probably more that God's going to do if I'm transparent with him. Back to the miracle. Just, he knows it anyway. Why pretend it's not in there?
Well, and for me, it makes sense to me because I'm the type of person that I've learned that if I bottle stuff in,
Right.
I will just lose it over something crazy. You can ask him. Over something that doesn't make sense. And so I'm like, I do better just voicing it as I go or when I think it. But again, it's like God has a purpose in all of it, just because it is where you can, I don't know, where you don't realize that you're actually challenging yourself when you're that transparent with God.
Right. Right. Things can happen when we're that transparent, right?
Yeah, so the question is it groaning or gnashing? And the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's it, but, because it's not just in health-related issues.
Oh, no. Any.
But I can certainly say that someone here where you're groaning and gnashing at, serious illness, and, am I gnashing my teeth and being, selfish? Or is it true groaning of how can, I move past it?
Yeah.
But if you're happy, you're a mystic. Paradox.
Yeah.
You know
Okay. Marcia, who's the lady author, Kate
Kate Bowler,
Bowler? She was diagnosed with stage
stage
4,
4, colon cancer.
and she's a
She was in her, she had a
she-
2-year-old
she's at the divinity school,
in, Duke.
At Duke.
Divinity.
but she said she took up swearing
Yeah.
after she was diagnosed, and she's not regretted it. Right? I
And
mean,
she still does it.
yeah, she's a theologian, but she's like, because some things need to be damned, right? I mean, I remember, and this was at Freed Hardeman, which is not the seat of liberalism. I remember Dr. Clyde Woods, saying, it's not wrong to say damn. Now, we don't want to go around damning everything because that would be inappropriate. But, there's some, whatever it is, John 16:16, certain things, damn. So even his point was, it's not like wrong, it's ridiculous to do it about everything. But I think that's what Kate Blanchard's saying. She's saying, Kate Bowler is saying is like, this was really awful, and I just had to verbalize it with cursing, and you know what? That's okay. I feel better about it, right? Right. So, yeah, I think that's important. No, I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to say it about every little thing. But some things deserve to be denounced in the strongest terms, right? Injustice. So, no, we don't want to be people of coarse language all the time. That's not good. but there's a point there. There's a holy anger about it all, right? And that's okay. Okay, Jim.
You know, I think that, the question of whining and groaning, I think a lot of times they are the same thing, but it's really more what do you do with it, right? Because in what we're looking at here, with the groaning, there's an expectation. And then if we go back to there's an element of joy, which ultimately means there's some gratitude. I mean, those are inextricably tied, so that maybe it's not so much what I'm expressing in the moment, but what am I expecting to come ultimately? And so that, you know, the groaning of childbirth, well, it's not something that's done, there's certainly that expectation of something beautiful is coming from this. Something's going to be working together for good, as we read a little later, kind of the concept of from the groaning. So it's what do I do with my whining and groaning? Not, can I not express it?
Right.
But what do I expect God to do with that?
Yeah.
With me, through me, by me, without me? Right?
Yeah. And I love your point. Love where you're going. I'll add a little bit to it. Just the fact that God is still going to bring something doesn't
It's
give
awful, man.
meaning to the moment. The moment still may be ridiculous and irredeemable, but God can still do something, right? It doesn't mean I have to find a silver lining in my stage 4 cancer. No, I don't have to, right? I can say, this is abhorrent, but I know God is still working out something ultimately good, even if this is ultimately despicable, right? That's a little bit that I think is important to me, because I don't always have to say, well, somehow the Holocaust was good, right? You know, my adopted brother and sister had 4 relatives left. He sent me a picture of a Jewish family reunion, like in the 1920s in Germany, where they're from, and there's this mass of people. He said 4 survived. You know, I don't have to tell my brother, but God was working all this out for good, right? No, that was, if you want to swear, curse about that, right? That was horrible. But did it all, like, could God not overrule all of that somehow and say, but there can still be a good end? But I'm not saying that was a good means. That wasn't the means to get to that end. This was just a horrible, terrible, curseable sort of thing. Yeah, but I love what you're saying, that the ambiguous.
Isn't that sort of like what you're talking about? Confession is being honest. You
Yeah.
know, that you're not trying to figure out what's safe for God to hear, or what's safe for me to say. You're just being honest, you know?
Yeah, I love the way you put that. We're not trying to figure out what's safe for God to hear. I like that way of putting it.
Because here's our thoughts anyway.
Yeah, that's like the word. He knows it anyway. It's better for me if I can just pour it out. If it's angry, if it's bitter, and not worry. Am I am I gnashing my teeth? Probably am. But you know what? I may get past gnashing my teeth if I pour it out.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but I'm not going to get anywhere by stuffing it and denying that it's there, pretending I don't feel these awful things about what happened or what is happening, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing to be gained there. Okay, back to you, Alan.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate what Jim was saying, because it made me kind of light bulb went off. And I'm personalizing this some because we're family. But there was gnashing teeth, and there is where am I going with this anger with my medical station? And Jim just made the light bulb go off. It's the way you deal with it is gratitude. And gratitude was handed to me when you see a 30-year-old with no hair in a wheelchair going in for an infusion treatment. And as you guys know, I'm sitting there, I look like I'm picking somebody up for an infusion treatment. So that, to me, the gnashing of teeth, usually God opens up the door to me seeing somebody as I need to do.
That could be an avenue of how that happens. Yeah.
I love what you said earlier, that shows that God speaks to us with love that we get from others.
Yeah.
I'm always comforted in knowing that whether I'm gnashing my teeth or I'm groaning, that what I'm asking, if it's in God's will, if it's God's will for this to be done, then so be it. I'm usually asking God, help me to accept your answer. 'Cause it may not be what I'm hoping for.
Yeah. And at some point, it won't be. Because I'd rather not die and I'd rather remain eternally healthy. But at some point, that's not going to happen, right? Not that I'm perfectly healthy now, but I'm reasonably healthy, right? You know, so at some point, it's not going to be what I want, right? So yeah, there's a big part of that's Kierkegaard's to will one thing, which is to will the will of God. When I can will whatever God wills, it's you know his meditation on not my will but yours be done. Jesus' statement in the garden. Getting to that place where what I really want is whatever you want, even if it conflicts with what I want. Because I trust you, but you've got to have the Abba-Father relationship. He has to be your papa. Abba is the endearing, term of the toddler who just learned to speak. That's the daddy term. When you've got that relationship where you know the Father loves you and you know that the Father will take care of you and you feel close, not at all fearful, not worried in the least about being condemned and discarded or anything like that, well, then you can pray, your will, not mine, because it will always ultimately be good, even if in the interim it's not. And I don't know, I still wouldn't attribute the interim to necessarily the will of God, like this problem is the will of God. No, the will of God is the good. This is the corruption of the world that God detests. That's why the creation is groaning, because creation is experiencing something other than what God wills. Right? I'm not a person who says everything that happens in the world is the will of God. Some people say that. Again, that means that the Holocaust is the will of God and every atrocity is the will of God, and it's just not. Right? So what the will of God is the good to which everything's moving. The interim corruption is the world being under the rule of sin and death, under the prince of the power of the air. This is what is ruining the world, but God is going to save his creation. And he's going to rid the world of that. Right?
I still have a hard time responding to questions of the nature of, if there is a God, how can he happen?
I don't have an answer.
I mean,
But how can you move from gnashing of teeth to groaning by the definitions you use? I said gratitude, but I'm struggling. I'm trying to think of what else will help you move from gnashing to groaning.
I think relationship with God. I mean, just true, intimate relationship with God, knowing you're loved, can help us weather all sorts of horrible things.
that's kind of the maturity model.
Yeah, there's some, but it's hard to, but cultivate a deep relationship can get us through lots of things that would be unsurvivable. Basically, if you're on your own, good luck. If I'm having to face this by myself, I got no hope. But I got tons of questions that can't be answered, like why is this happening already? But more than I need answers of why it's happening, I need to know, am I alone? Fear of abandonment is like core human longing to belong. And the problem is Christianity has couched itself as preaching the news of abandonment. You better do right or you'll be abandoned by God. I mean, we've made like the core appeal is you're going to be abandoned by God unless you do this. That's not what Jesus came preaching, is you're going to be abandoned, right? So it may not seem like it, but in the midst of the deepest, darkest things we're going through, knowing you're not alone means more than I have knowledge as to why this is transpiring. Because the knowledge about why it's transpiring is often not comforting at all, right? Might be transpiring because people are evil. Well, if I know that doesn't help. That someone is with me in the midst of it, that I've got someone to pray to talk to, who's speaking into me as well and praying from within me, that can get me through. That's my sense. Okay.
That sounds really good, but I think when you're in those situations, it's hard to do that. To me,
Yeah.
fellowship is finding people who are struggling with those same issues and voicing those, somehow gives credence to your feeling, but also gives you a community that, I look at these other people and they're struggling too. So, I think it is community
Yeah.
with God, but I think it's community with other humans.
Right.
That are safe humans, and many times people, I know, obviously with Sarah died, it was being with other people who had lost, I looked around, I liked them, and I thought, they're suffering too, why shouldn't I suffer? To me, I think human community is as important as, because then that allows you to have a better communion with God.
Yeah, because we're talking about the same thing, the incarnational experience of that relationship with God through the conduit of other people. Like you say, someone else. It's not that I have,
I'm not alone in this.
Yeah, again, I'm not abandoned. I'm not the only one struggling with this. It's great comfort to know, hey, did that make it easier? No, but at least I know I'm not alone, because if you have the sense I'm the only one, everyone else's life is going marvelous. That's what social media teaches us, right? Everyone else is on vacation and they just went to the Bahamas and I'm the only one who's struggling. Well, when you're with other people and you realize I'm not the only one, then all of a sudden you're not alone. You're not abandoned, right? And that, I think that's...
people who are honest, that say, I'm really struggling.
Yeah, exactly. Who are beyond denial of saying, well, everything's fine, but they're honestly, this is tough. Then all of a sudden
They're using curse words.
yeah, it doesn't make your struggle any less, but what all of a sudden you realize is I'm not alone. And these people can listen to me and go, I agree, I get it. That's so comforting, but the problem's still there. But see, that's a great example.
Can you have a relationship with God if you don't have a relationship with others?
No, which is why it's beautiful that you brought that up. Because I can talk about
It's your
having a
deserted
relationship.
island that you always-
Do what?
It's your deserted island.
Yeah, you can't be a Christian all by yourself on a deserted island. Yeah, so the point is I can articulate what I did, but your point is excellent in saying, well, how does that actually happen? Well, it happens in community with others, people that you can trust, with whom you can be vulnerable, who won't criticize you for cursing or grinding your teeth, but say, I get it, yeah, oh, that's horrible. That's helpful.
It is.
Yeah, it's absolutely helpful. And if you don't have that, then you need to find that. You need to seek that. Who are those people that you can curse and they're not going to judge you over it. They're going to say, yeah, I've felt that same way.
It's kind of hard to find
Especially in churches.
that. Yeah.
A lot of churches.
Yeah.
I think the onus should sometimes be on us to give them.
Yes.
In this passage, I find a helpful way to do that, because I think, for me, a big barrier to do it is not knowing what to say. And the problem of pain, not having an answer that I can give, right, things like that. I mean, it's impossible for me to address it in words what the person's suffering, and I can't even know the depth of their suffering either. But I can speak to it because God literally is telling us that, you know, we believe that he himself went through something like pretty horrible, pretty unjust, and even still today is literally groaning with us when we don't even know what to say. And so I think that absolves us of having to have an answer for anything.
Right.
We just need to offer candor, allow people space to listen to them and their suffering. And I think we ought to volunteer probably more often. I think the reason I don't do it as much as I can is probably because I feel inadequate to the text and don't know what to say. But here, we're told we don't need to know what to say.
Right.
We just need to be together with them.
Yeah.
And acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And I find it helpful to also acknowledge that the Spirit's doing the same thing.
Job's friends did a great job until they opened their mouth. For the first few days, they just sat with Job on his misery. It was companionship. And then they started to try to explain why things were happening. And it went downhill real quick. Right? So we all think, well, what are we going to say? And the point is, you don't have to say anything. You could just say, you can affirm, that's terrible. And you don't say, I totally understand. Unless you totally understand, you better not say that. Because that sounds like it's, kind of diminishing. Like if I've not been through that, I'm not going to say I totally understand. I can say things like, I can't imagine how difficult that must be and what you're feeling. You're affirming them. You're not giving any answers. You're just being present. You share in their grief. Yeah, you don't. And to me, that's the presence of the suffering God. You're being the presence of the suffering God who does not explain either, but is present. So, all right, well, we need to stop. Hope you have a blessed week.